12,000 feet beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a facility that did not exist on any public record. General Sam Harper sat alone in a concrete room and stared at a screen. The message had arrived 90 seconds ago. 4 words. Open the Lazarus file. He had spent 30 years of his life waiting for those words, and now that they were here, he allowed himself exactly 5 seconds to close his eyes and breathe. Then he picked up the phone and called Admiral Lena Brooks. Lena was aboard the carrier Longbow, stationed in what the public believed was a deep space research orbit around Jupiter. In reality, the Longbow was the command vessel of a fleet that the rest of the galaxy did not know existed. When her secure line buzzed and she saw the code prefix, she answered before the second ring. "Lazarus is open," Sam said. No greeting, no small talk. There was a pause on the other end. Then Lena's voice, steady as iron. "Understood. How long do we have?" "Intelligence says their combined fleets will reach Sol in approximately 41 days. That gives us 5 weeks to move everything into position." "That is more than enough," Lena said, and she meant it. To understand why she meant it, to understand any of what was about to happen, you had to go back 50 years, to the day humanity first stepped onto the galactic stage and shook hands with the civilizations that had been watching them from the dark. When the first human diplomatic team traveled to Etheris Prime and took their seat in the Grand Chamber, they were led by a man named Pete Granger. Pete was not a soldier or a scientist. He was a retired school principal from Ohio, who had been recruited by the government because he had spent 40 years managing difficult people and had never once lost his temper. They were right, but not in the way they expected. Pete spent his first year on Etheris Prime doing nothing but watching and listening. He smiled at every alien who spoke to him. He accepted every unfair trade deal. He nodded politely when the Velari delegates told him that humanity was too young and too primitive to participate in military discussions. He said thank you when the Korath hegemony offered Earth a trade agreement that gave the Korath 90% of the value and left Earth with scraps. And every night, Pete went back to the human embassy and wrote detailed reports. Not about politics, not about trade, about power. He studied how the galaxy actually worked, who controlled what, who feared whom, where the supply lines ran, where the weaknesses were. He mapped the relationships between every major species, noted which alliances were real and which were built on threats, and identified every single piece of technology that the alien civilizations used. At the end of his first year, Pete sent a single classified document to the leadership back on Earth. The document was 60 pages long, but its conclusion could be summarized in one paragraph. The galaxy operated on fear and strength. No species would ever respect humanity unless humanity could stand on equal ground. But if Earth tried to build its strength openly, the major powers would crush them before they were ready. The only path forward was patience. Earth had to play weak while it built itself into something strong. The leadership agreed, and so the long game began. Over the next 5 decades, humanity did exactly what Pete Granger had recommended. On the surface, Earth remained the quiet newcomer, small fleet, limited technology, no military ambition. Human diplomats continued to smile and accept bad deals. Human scientists publicly struggled with basic faster-than-light travel, while the Velari laughed at their efforts. But beneath the surface, everything was different. Every piece of alien technology that came through trade, no matter how outdated or restricted, was taken apart, studied, and rebuilt by teams of engineers working in hidden facilities on Earth, Mars, and the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. A man named Nick Brady, who had been recruited out of a university lab at the age of 23, spent his entire career leading these teams. By the time he was 40, Nick had not only matched the best alien weapons technology, he had surpassed it. The shipyards were the biggest secret, hidden inside hollowed-out asteroids in the belt, buried beneath the surface of Europa and Titan, and concealed within the deep canyons of Mars, humanity built warships. Not 300, which was the number the galaxy believed. 1,800 more, each one carrying weapons and defenses that the alien civilizations had never seen and could not predict. And then there was the intelligence network. Over the decades, human operatives were quietly placed across the galaxy. They took jobs on alien stations, learned alien languages, and built relationships that gave them access to information no outsider was supposed to have. One of the best was a man named Chris Malone, who had been living on the Korath homeworld for 11 years under a false identity, working as a trade consultant. Chris had mapped every major Korath military installation, supply depot, and communication relay. He was not alone. There were dozens like him, scattered across alien space, all reporting back to Longbow Station. The Lazarus file was the result of all of this work. It was not just a war plan. It was a complete picture of the galaxy's military landscape. Every fleet position, every weakness, every supply chain vulnerability, every political pressure point. It had been updated continuously for decades, refined and tested in simulations that ran day and night in the computers buried beneath the Rockies. When Danny Cole's message arrived, Sam Harper did not need to scramble. He did not need to improvise. He simply opened the file that had been waiting, fully prepared, for this exact day. Within hours, the Lazarus Protocol was active. Across the solar system, concealed shipyards powered up. Crews who had been training in secret for years boarded their vessels. On Europa, a fleet of fast-attack corvettes launched from beneath the ice. On Mars, heavy cruisers rose from underground hangars. In the asteroid belt, the largest of the hidden shipyards opened its bay doors and released a line of destroyers that stretched for miles. Admiral Lena Brooks stood on the bridge of the Longbow and watched her fleet come together. She had spent her entire career preparing for a war she hoped would never come, but always knew would. She was not afraid. She was ready. Meanwhile, aboard the Steadfast, Danny Cole joined a secure briefing with Sam, Lena, and President Megan Price. The president was a calm woman with sharp eyes who had been briefed on the Lazarus file on her first day in office and had spent every day since hoping she would never have to authorize it. But she had always known the truth. Peace with the galaxy was never going to last, not because humanity wanted war, but because the powers that ruled the galaxy would never allow a rising species to exist in peace. "You have full authorization," Megan said. "Bring our people home safe." He looked at the faces on the screen, the general, the admiral, the president, and he thought about Pete Granger, now 89 years old and living quietly in a small house in Ohio. Pete, who had seen the truth before anyone else, and had laid the first stone of a plan that would take half a century to complete. The galaxy had spent 50 years laughing at humanity. They were about to find out what the humans had been doing while they laughed. The combined alien armada dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system on a Tuesday morning, Earth time. 12,000 warships, arranged in a formation that stretched across 200,000 miles of space, carrying enough firepower to burn a planet to glass. At the front of the formation flew the Valari flagship, a massive vessel called the Wrath of Zorath, with the High Chancellor himself watching from its command deck. Zorath stood with his 4 eyes fixed on the tactical display. Earth's known fleet, just under 300 ships, most of them small patrol corvettes and aging frigates, was supposed to be the only thing standing between his armada and the human homeworld. His military advisors had told him the battle would last hours, not days. Some had even suggested the humans might surrender before a single shot was fired. He expected confusion. What he got instead was silence. The Sol system was quiet. No distress signals, no panicked transmissions, No desperate calls for negotiation. Just silence, and the slow blue glow of a star called the sun, burning in the distance. "Scan the system," Zorath ordered. His sensor officers worked quickly. Their instruments swept across the solar system, mapping everything they could detect. For a long moment, the readings showed exactly what Zorath expected. A handful of human ships near Earth, some orbital stations, a few mining platforms on Mars, and in the asteroid belt. Then, the readings changed. It started with the asteroids. Deep inside the belt, energy signatures began appearing one after another, like lights turning on in a dark building. Dozens of them. Then, hundreds. The sensor officers froze at their stations, their hands hovering over their controls as the numbers climbed. "What is that?" Zorath asked. Before anyone could answer, the signatures multiplied again. From behind the moons of Jupiter, from beneath the surface of Europa, from the deep canyons of Mars, from hidden positions among the rings of Saturn. Ships, human ships, were appearing everywhere, powering up weapons and shields that registered on the Velara scanners as completely unknown. Admiral Lena Brooks stood on the bridge of the Longbow, the largest warship humanity had ever built, and watched her fleet fall into formation around her. 1,800 vessels that had never been seen by alien eyes joined the 300 that the galaxy already knew about. 2,100 warships, each one carrying technology that had been developed in secret over 50 years. Lena looked at the tactical display and allowed herself one small nod of satisfaction. "All ships, this is Admiral Brooks," she said into the fleet-wide channel. "You know why we are here. You know what we have trained for. Hold your formations and follow your orders. Today, the galaxy learns who we really are." The alien armada hesitated. Zorath stared at his display, watching the numbers climb. And for the first time in his long career, he felt something he did not recognize. It took him a moment to understand what it was. It was doubt. But he was the High Chancellor of the Velari Dominion, and he had never retreated from anything. "All ships, advance," he ordered. "They are still outnumbered. Destroy them." The two fleets closed the distance between them, and the first battle of the war began. The alien commanders expected a conventional engagement, shield against shield, weapon against weapon, the kind of fight where numbers decided everything. What they got was something entirely different. The human ships moved in ways the aliens had never seen. They were faster, more agile, and coordinated with a precision that seemed almost impossible. Formations shifted and adapted in real time, responding to alien movements before the alien commanders had even finished giving their orders. Human targeting systems locked onto weak points in alien shields that the aliens themselves did not know existed, and weapons fired that produced effects the Velari had never encountered. Nick Brady sat at his station aboard the Longbow, his fingers moving across 3 separate consoles at once. Nick was the chief engineer and electronic warfare specialist, and this was the moment his entire life's work had been building toward. He had spent 20 years studying alien computer systems, finding their flaws, and designing tools to exploit them. Now he put those tools to work. Across the alien fleet, navigation computers began to fail. Ships that were flying in tight formation suddenly veered off course, crashing into each other or drifting out of position. Communication channels filled with static as Nick's systems jammed their frequencies. Entire squadrons went dark, unable to coordinate, unable to receive orders, unable to do anything but drift and wait for the human weapons to find them. The Korath hegemony ships, which made up nearly a third of the alien armada, were hit the hardest. Their technology was older than the Velaris, and far more vulnerable to Nick's electronic attacks. Within the first hour, over 600 Korath vessels were disabled or destroyed, without firing a single effective shot. The Sindari Pact fared only slightly better. Their ships were faster than the Koraths, but their shields were weaker, and the human weapons cut through them with terrible efficiency. Sindari captains began breaking formation and retreating before they received orders to do so, their survival instincts overriding their loyalty to the Alliance. Lena Brooks directed the battle from the Longbow's Bridge with the calm focus of a woman who had rehearsed this fight 1,000 times in simulation. She pushed the alien flanks inward, forced their formations to compress, and then hit the compressed groups with concentrated fire that left nothing behind but wreckage. It was not just a battle, it was a demonstration. By the time Zorath ordered a general retreat, the Alliance had lost over 2,000 ships. The human fleet had lost 47. The surviving alien vessels scattered, jumping to faster-than-light speed in every direction, leaving behind a field of debris that stretched for thousands of miles. Zorath stood on the bridge of his flagship, which had taken damage to its forward sections but was still functional, and stared at the tactical display in silence. His officers did not speak. No one knew what to say. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the second phase of the Lazarus Protocol was already underway. On the Korath homeworld, Chris Malone received a coded signal on a device hidden inside a piece of jewelry he wore around his wrist. He had been waiting for this signal for 11 years. Within minutes, he activated a network of human operatives and local allies that he had spent over a decade building. Supply depots were sabotaged. Fuel reserves were contaminated. Communication relays were destroyed in what appeared to be equipment failures, but were in fact precisely targeted attacks. The Alliance's ability to resupply, regroup, and coordinate began to collapse from the inside, and they had no idea it was happening. And then Danny Cole's voice echoed across every communication channel in the galaxy. Every council species, every military frequency, every civilian broadcast heard the same message, spoken in the same calm and measured tone that Danny had used in the Grand Chamber. This is Ambassador Danny Cole of the United Earth Government. We did not choose this war. It was forced upon us by those who believed that our silence was weakness, and our patience was fear. They were wrong. To every civilization not involved in this conflict, you have nothing to fear from humanity. We have no interest in conquest and no desire for empire. But to those who declared war on us, we are still here, and we strongly suggest you reconsider your decision before more lives are lost. The message ended. Across the galaxy, in council chambers and military command centers, and civilian homes on 100 different worlds, aliens looked at each other in stunned silence. The humans had been sitting quietly at the back of the room for 50 years, and nobody had thought to ask what they were building in the dark. The Alliance began to break apart 12 days after the first battle, and it started with a secret message sent from a Sindari diplomat named Valeth to the human cruiser Steadfast. The message was short and carefully worded. It asked whether Ambassador Danny Cole would be willing to meet, privately and without the knowledge of the Velari or the Korath, to discuss the possibility of a separate peace. Danny read it twice, then looked across the briefing table at Katie Marsh. It could be a trap, Katie said. She had been saying that about almost everything lately, and she was usually right to say it. But Danny had spent over 2 decades reading people, human and alien, and there was something in the careful phrasing of Valeth's message that told him this was real. It is not a trap, Danny said. They are scared. The Sindari took heavy losses in the battle, and their fleet was never built for a long war. They joined this alliance because the Velari threatened them, not because they wanted to fight us. He agreed to the meeting. They met on a small trading station in neutral space, far from any major shipping lanes. Danny arrived with Katie and 2 Marines. Valeth arrived alone, which Danny noted as a sign of either great trust or great desperation. Probably both. Valeth was smaller than most aliens Danny had dealt with. The Sindari were a slender species with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They were known as traders and scientists, not warriors. The fact that they had been dragged into a military alliance against their nature told Danny everything he needed to know about how the Valori operated. "I will speak plainly," Valeth said, sitting across from Danny at a bare metal table. "High Chancellor Zorath told us that if we did not join the alliance, the Valari would annex our border colonies. We had no choice. But after what happened at your star system, my government believes that continuing this war will lead to the destruction of our people." Danny nodded. He had expected this, but he let Valeth finish. "We are asking for peace," Valeth said, "but we have nothing to offer you. Our fleet is damaged. Our economy is strained. We cannot give you anything of military value." Danny was quiet for a moment. Katie watched him from across the room, one hand resting on her sidearm, her eyes never leaving Valeth. Then Danny spoke. "You are wrong," he said. "You have something very valuable to offer us. You can show the rest of the galaxy that this war does not have to continue. If the Sindari withdraw from the Alliance publicly, it sends a message to every other species watching this conflict that there is a way out that does not involve destruction." He laid out his terms, and they were so generous that Valeth actually leaned back in surprise. "Full ceasefire, effective immediately, no reparations, no territory demands. A mutual defense agreement that would protect Sindari colonies from Valari retaliation, and access to human technology through fair and equal trade, something no alien species had ever been offered before." "Why?" Valeth asked, and the confusion in the diplomat's voice was real. "You are winning. You could demand anything." "Because we are not trying to build an empire," Danny said simply. "We are trying to build something better." Valeth agreed to the terms that same day. Within 48 hours, the Sindari Pact announced its withdrawal from the Alliance in a public broadcast to the entire Galactic Council. The announcement hit the galaxy like a shockwave. Suddenly, the war that had seemed like a united front against humanity was revealed to be fractured and unstable. Council species that had been quietly watching from the sidelines began sending private messages to Danny's office, asking whether similar arrangements might be possible. The Korath hegemony was the next to crack, but their collapse came from the inside. Chris Malone had spent 11 years building his network on the Korath homeworld, and now that network was delivering results. The sabotage campaign had crippled the Korath's ability to resupply their fleet. Fuel depots were empty, ammunition reserves were contaminated, communication systems were unreliable. Korath military commanders, who had already been shaken by the defeat at Sol, began to question why they were fighting a war they clearly could not win. The breaking point came when a Korath general named Drekthar, a respected military leader who had opposed the alliance from the beginning, contacted General Sam Harper through a back channel that Chris Malone had quietly established months earlier. Drekthar's proposal was straightforward. He would lead a military coup against the Korath government, remove the leaders who had supported the alliance with the Valari, and establish a new government that would immediately sue for peace. In return, he wanted one thing: a promise that Earth would not interfere in Korath internal politics and would allow the Korath to govern themselves without human oversight. Sam brought the proposal to President Megan Price. The president considered it carefully. She consulted with Danny, with Lena, and with her civilian advisors. The decision was not easy. Supporting a coup in a foreign government was a serious step, even in wartime. But the alternative, a prolonged war with the Korath that would cost lives on both sides, was worse. "Tell him we agree," Megan said, "but make it clear that we expect the new government to honor the peace. No second chances." Drekthar moved within the week. The Korath coup was swift and nearly bloodless. The old leadership was removed and placed under arrest. Drekthar took control, and immediately sent a formal surrender to Earth, along with a request for peace negotiations. Danny accepted. The Velari Dominion now stood alone, and High Chancellor Zorath was not handling it well. The Velari had always been the strongest of the three allies, and Zorath had always believed that strength alone was enough to win any conflict. The loss at Sol had shaken him, but he had blamed it on the incompetence of his Korath and Sindari allies. The betrayal of those allies, because that was how Zorath saw it, as betrayal, filled him with a cold and dangerous fury. In his command chamber aboard his flagship, Zorath made a decision that would change everything. He ordered his military to retrieve and activate a weapon that had been hidden in a secure vault on the Velari throne world for over 300 years. A device known as the Annihilator. It was a planet-killing weapon designed to destroy an entire world in a single blast. Its existence was a violation of galactic law, so severe that even possessing it carried a sentence of permanent exile from the Council. But Zorath no longer cared about the Council. He no longer cared about law. He cared about one thing only: making the humans pay. The weapon was moved from its vault to a heavily armored orbital platform above the Velari homeworld, surrounded by the remnants of the Velari fleet. Zorath ordered a course plotted toward Earth. He intended to end the war not through strategy or diplomacy, but through annihilation. He might have succeeded, if not for Dana Holt. Dana was a human intelligence agent who had been operating near Velari space for 7 years. She was quiet, careful, and extraordinarily good at her job. When the Annihilator was moved from its vault, Dana's network of local contacts picked up the activity within hours. She transmitted an emergency report through a chain of encrypted relay stations that bounced the signal across half the galaxy before it reached Longbow Station. Sam Harper read the report and felt his stomach drop. He had planned for many things. He had not planned for a planet killer. He immediately contacted Admiral Lena Brooks. "We have a problem," he said, and then he told her what it was. Lena listened without interruption. When Sam finished, she was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "How long until they can deploy it?" "Our best estimate is 10 to 14 days. "Then we have 10 days to stop it," Lena said. "Get me everything Dana has on the platform's defenses. I am taking the fleet into Velari space." Danny Cole, listening to the briefing from the Steadfast, felt the weight of the moment settle onto his shoulders. Everything they had built, every year of patience, every sacrifice, every quiet victory, all of it would mean nothing if that weapon reached Earth. He looked at Katie Marsh, standing beside him as she always was. "It is not over yet," he said. Katie checked her weapon and nodded. Admiral Lena Brooks had never taken her fleet into enemy territory before. Every simulation, every training exercise, every scenario in the Lazarus file had been built around the defense of Earth and the Sol system. But now she was leading 1,200 warships across the galaxy toward the Velari throne world, and the rules had changed. The journey took 6 days at maximum speed. 6 days of silence across the fleet. 6 days of crews checking weapons and running final system diagnostics. 6 days of Lena standing on the bridge of the Longbow and studying every piece of intelligence Dana Holt had been able to send about the Annihilator and its defenses. The picture was not encouraging. The weapon platform was in high orbit above the Velari homeworld, protected by over 1,000 Velari warships, the best that remained of their fleet. The platform itself was heavily armored and shielded, and the Annihilator weapon at its core was powered by an energy source so massive that it distorted the surrounding space on sensor readings. Taking it out from a distance would not work. The shields were too strong. They would need to get close, and they would need to get someone inside. On the 7th day, the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Velari system. Lena looked at the tactical display and saw what she expected, a wall of enemy ships between her and the planet, and the Annihilator platform glowing like a small sun behind them. "All ships, this is Admiral Brooks," she said. "Our mission is simple. We stop that weapon. Whatever it costs, we stop it. Engage at will." The battle began. This fight was different from the first one at Sol. The Velari were fighting on their home ground, desperate and furious, and they threw everything they had at the human fleet. Lena's ships were better, faster, and more advanced, but the Velari had numbers, and they had the rage of a civilization that knew it was fighting for survival. Human ships began to take real damage for the first time. A destroyer on the left flank took a direct hit to its engine section and broke apart. Two corvettes collided while maneuvering through heavy fire. A cruiser lost its shields and was hammered by a dozen Velari weapons before it could withdraw. Lena watched the casualty reports scroll across her display and forced herself to keep breathing. Nick Brady was at his station aboard the longbow, running his electronic warfare systems at full capacity. The Velari had learned from the first battle and had hardened their computer systems against his attacks, but Nick had expected that. He shifted tactics, targeting the communication links between the Velari fleet and the Annihilator platform. If he could isolate the platform from its escorts, even briefly, it would create an opening. It took him 2 hours. 2 hours of the most intense electronic combat he had ever experienced, his fingers moving across the consoles without pause, sweat running down the sides of his face. But slowly, methodically, he peeled away the connections between the platform and its protectors. The Velari fleet began to lose coordination, just slightly, just enough. "Admiral," Nick said, his voice rough with exhaustion, "I can give you a window. 60 seconds, maybe 90. The platform's shields will be at full strength, but it will be isolated from fleet support." "That is all I need," Lena said. She opened a channel to the Steadfast, which had arrived with the fleet carrying Danny Cole and his team. "Katie, you are up." Lieutenant Katie Marsh had been preparing for this moment since the fleet left Sol. She stood in the Steadfast's hangar bay with a team of 30 Marines, the best combat operators humanity had. They wore heavy assault armor, fitted with systems Nick Brady had personally designed to counter Velari security measures. Each one of them understood the mission. Get aboard the platform, reach the core control room, shut down the weapon. Katie looked at her team and did not give a speech. She simply said, "Stay close, move fast, and do not stop for anything." They boarded 4 fast assault shuttles and launched from the Steadfast as Nick Brady's window opened. The Velari fleet, momentarily confused by the disruption of their communication network, failed to react in time. The 4 shuttles tore through the gap in the defensive line and slammed into the docking ports on the underside of the Annihilator platform. The boarding action was brutal. The Velari had placed their elite guards aboard the platform, tall, heavily armored soldiers bred for close combat. Katie's Marines fought through corridor after corridor, using breaching charges to blast through sealed doors, and Nick's electronic countermeasures to disable security systems ahead of their advance. They lost people. A Marine named Greg Torres took a direct hit covering his squad's advance through a junction. Another named Amy Soto held a corridor alone for 3 minutes while the rest of the team moved past her. She was still firing when the last Marine cleared the hallway. Katie pushed forward. The core control room was at the center of the platform, behind 6 layers of armored bulkheads. Each layer had to be breached, and each one was defended. By the time Katie reached the final door, she had 12 Marines left out of 30. The door was sealed with a locking mechanism that no amount of explosives could break. Katie pressed her hand to the communication panel on her armor. "Nick, I need the shield codes, now." On the longbow, Nick Brady was fighting the hardest battle of his life. The Velari had realized what was happening and were throwing everything they had at breaking through his electronic interference. His systems were overheating. Warning lights flashed across every console. He had minutes at most before the whole network collapsed, and the Velari fleet regained full coordination. He worked faster than he ever had. His fingers found patterns in the alien code that he had spent 20 years learning to read. Layer by layer, he cracked the encryption on the platform's internal security. The final code resolved on his screen with 4 seconds to spare. "Sending now," he said, and transmitted the codes. Katie's armor received the data. She entered the codes into the locking mechanism, and the door opened. The core control room was a massive circular chamber, dominated by a single console that pulsed with a deep blue light, the heart of the Annihilator. 2 Velari elite guards stood between her and the console. Katie did not hesitate. She moved forward with the speed and violence that came from years of training and the knowledge that 8 billion people on Earth were counting on what she did in the next 10 seconds. The guards fell. Katie reached the console. Her hands moved across the alien controls, guided by the technical briefings she had memorized during the 6-day journey. One by one, she shut down the power systems. The blue light faded. A hum that had filled the platform since they boarded went silent. The Annihilator was dead. Outside, Lena Brooks saw the platform's energy signature collapse on her display. "All ships, target the platform's power generators. Finish it." The longbow and its escort ships fired a concentrated barrage that tore through the platform's external generators. The structure shuddered, broke apart, and collapsed into a cloud of debris that scattered across the Velari orbit. The Velari fleet, witnessing the destruction of their ultimate weapon, began to surrender. Ship after ship powered down its weapons and broadcast ceasefire signals. On the surface of the Velari homeworld, a group of senior officials seized High Chancellor Zorath in his command chamber and placed him under arrest. The war was over. 3 weeks later, Danny Cole walked into the Grand Chamber of Aetheris Prime for the second time. The room was the same. The pale stone walls, the curved rows of seats rising to the ceiling, the 400 alien delegations watching from above. The delegates, who had once looked down at the human section with amusement or contempt, now watched with something else entirely. Some showed respect. Some showed fear. Some showed curiosity. All of them were paying attention. Danny stood at the central podium and spoke. "We did not fight this war for territory. We did not fight it for revenge. We fought it because we were given no other choice. But now that it is over, we have a choice about what comes next. And what we choose is this: a new charter for this council, one built on genuine equality, one where no species is bullied, no species is silenced, and no species is forced to sit quietly while others decide their fate. We are offering our technology, our knowledge, and our partnership to any civilization willing to build this future with us. Not as rulers, not as conquerors, as equals." The chamber was silent. Then, slowly, the Sindari delegation began to signal their agreement. The new Korath representatives followed. One by one, species across the chamber added their voices, until the grand chamber was filled with a sound it had never heard before. The sound of genuine, voluntary consensus. On Earth, in a small house in Ohio, a man named Pete Granger watched the broadcast on a screen in his living room. He was 89 years old. His hands trembled, and his eyes were not as sharp as they had once been. But he saw Danny standing at that podium, and he heard the words, and he smiled the same quiet smile he had worn 50 years ago when he had first sat down in that chamber and started watching and listening. This was always the plan: not to dominate, not to punish, but to earn a seat at the table that no one could ever take away. Aboard the Steadfast, later that evening, Danny Cole stood at a viewport and watched the stars. The ship was quiet. The war was over, and the future, for the first time in decades, felt open and uncertain in the best possible way. Katie Marsh walked up beside him. She had a bandage on her left arm from the boarding action, and a tiredness in her eyes that would take weeks to fade. But she was alive, and so were the 12 Marines who had made it out of that platform with her. "Do you think it will last?" she asked. "The peace?" Danny was quiet for a long time, watching the stars drift past the viewport. Then he said, "It will, if we make it worth keeping." Katie nodded. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. They stood together in the silence, two people from a small blue planet that had been laughed at and underestimated and pushed to the edge, and had answered not with destruction, but with something the galaxy had never expected. A future worth believing in. The grand chamber of Atheris Prime was the largest room Danny Cole had ever stood in. It stretched upward like the inside of a cathedral, but wider and colder, built from pale stone that hummed faintly with energy. 400 alien delegations sat in curved rows that rose from the central floor to the distant ceiling, and every one of them was looking down at the small human section near the back wall. Danny had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 9 years. Before that, he had served as a junior diplomat for 12 more. In all that time, he had learned one thing above everything else. The galaxy did not respect humanity. It tolerated them the way a grown man tolerates a child sitting at the dinner table. You let the child sit there because it would be rude to send them away, but you never once asked the child for an opinion. He sat in his chair with his hands folded on his lap. Beside him, Lieutenant Katie Marsh stood at attention in her dress uniform, her jaw tight, and her eyes scanning the chamber with the careful focus of someone trained to notice threats before they arrived. Katie had been assigned as his security lead 3 years ago, and in that time, she had gone from treating the posting as boring diplomatic babysitting to treating it as the most dangerous assignment she had ever held. She was right to feel that way. The chamber quieted as High Chancellor Zorath of the Velari Dominion rose from his seat in the upper tier. Zorath was tall, even by Velari standards, nearly 8 feet, with smooth gray skin and 4 narrow eyes that never blinked at the same time. He wore a cloak of deep purple that marked his rank, and when he spoke, his voice carried through the chamber without any need for amplification. "The Galactic Council recognizes the following evidence," Zorath began, his tone heavy with authority. "The human civilization, in violation of territorial expansion statutes and weapons development treaties, has committed acts of aggression against the sovereign boundaries of 3 member states." Danny did not move. He had known this was coming for 6 months. His intelligence reports had been clear. The Velari Dominion, the Korath Hegemony, and the Sindari Pact had been meeting in secret, building an alliance with one shared goal: the subjugation of Earth. The charges were invented. The evidence was manufactured. None of that mattered. What mattered was that the 3 most powerful civilizations in the galaxy had decided that humanity had grown just a little too comfortable, and it was time to remind the humans of their place. In response to these violations, Zorath continued, the united forces of the Velari Dominion, the Korath Hegemony, and the Sindari Pact hereby issue a formal declaration of war against the human homeworld known as Earth and all of its colonial holdings. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some delegates leaned forward with interest. A few of the smaller species, the ones who had been bullied by these same 3 powers for centuries, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But nobody objected. Nobody stood up to say this was wrong. Danny had not expected them to. Zorath looked directly at the human section. All 4 of his eyes locked onto Danny with a cold satisfaction, as if he were watching a small animal walk into a trap. The human delegation may now respond. Every face in the chamber turned toward Danny Cole. 400 civilizations waited for the fear. They waited for the begging, the desperate pleas for mercy, the frantic requests for negotiation. That was what small species did when the powerful ones came for them. That was how the galaxy worked. The strong crushed the weak, and the weak said thank you. Danny stood up slowly. He straightened his jacket. He looked around the chamber, not quickly, not nervously, but with the calm patience of a man who had been waiting for this exact moment for a very long time. Then he smiled. It was not a nervous smile. It was not a polite diplomatic smile. It was the kind of smile that made Katie Marsh, who had served 2 combat deployments before this posting, feel a chill run down her spine. Finally, Danny said, his voice clear and steady. The time has come. Not the respectful silence of attention, but the confused silence of 400 species that had no idea what they were looking at. A Korath general in the upper rows leaned toward an aide and whispered something. A Sindari diplomat blinked several times in rapid succession, a sign of deep confusion in their species. Danny did not explain himself. He did not argue. He did not plead. He simply turned, nodded once to Katie, and walked toward the exit. Katie fell into step beside him, one hand resting near her sidearm out of habit. Behind them, the chamber erupted into noise, alien voices overlapping in dozens of languages, translators struggling to keep up with the chaos. They reached the shuttle bay in silence. The human diplomatic shuttle, a small and unremarkable vessel, sat waiting on the pad. Danny climbed aboard first. Katie sealed the hatch behind them and took the pilot's seat. As the shuttle lifted off from Aetheris Prime, and the massive station shrank in the rear viewport, Katie finally spoke. So what is the plan, Ambassador? Danny sat down in the passenger cabin and pulled out a secure communication device, a small black unit that looked like nothing special, but was, in fact, one of the most encrypted pieces of technology humanity had ever built. He entered a code, waited for the connection to establish, and when a voice on the other end confirmed the secure link, Danny said 4 words. Open the Lazarus file. He ended the call, placed the device back in his pocket, and leaned back in his seat. Katie watched him through the open cockpit door, waiting for more. Danny looked at her, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw something behind his eyes that was not patience and was not diplomacy. It was relief. Katie, he said quietly, I have spent 21 years smiling at people who hated us, shaking hands with people who wanted us dead, and sitting in that chamber while they laughed at us behind our backs. Every single day I did my job, and I kept my mouth shut, and I waited. He paused and looked out the viewport at the stars. They just made the biggest mistake in the history of their civilizations, and they do not even know it yet. Katie did not ask any more questions. She had served long enough to know when something was above her clearance level. But, as she guided the shuttle toward the human diplomatic cruiser, Steadfast, waiting in orbit at the edge of the system, she felt something she had not expected to feel on the day that war was declared against her entire species. She felt calm. Because whatever Danny Cole knew, whatever the Lazarus file contained, it was clear that this moment was not the beginning of a disaster. It was the beginning of something that had been planned for a very long time. And for the first time since she had arrived on Aetheris Prime, Katie Marsh understood why Earth had sent a man like Danny Cole to sit quietly in that chamber, year after year, smiling at every insult. He had not been enduring. He had been waiting.